actually called Don Bailey because of his tenure and long-standing relationship with ASA and doing a great job as tournament director.
Yeah,
Hey, look at this.
I'm the Godfather. He's the Don. I mean,
That's
he's
right.
the Don.
The Don. We're here with the godfather of the ASA, Mike Tyrell. So we sat down to do some video today, Mike, mostly to talk about schedule and the debacle we had in Coleman with communication, my debacle, the cosmic wedgie.
That's not me.
But talk about the schedule, the sites that we have for next year, what's involved in site selection. And so to get started, why don't we have officially put the schedule out there, what is on the website, the ASA app, what was shared on Facebook is now the current schedule. But why don't you?
Well, don't call it the current schedule.
Yeah,
the
final schedule.
This ship is underway. Don't make it sound like we might redirect the boat somewhere.
No,
we're going to Foley February 22nd to 25th. We're going to Russell County and Uchi Creek in March. We're going to Camp Minden in April. We're going to Clarksville, Tennessee, which is a new site that, to be very honest, the Godfather's never seen that site. I have had no dealings with those people. And because of that, we had the problem with the Metropolis site, because apparently I was not completely aware of what had happened or transpired in Clarksville. And I found out that the information we had about Metropolis, and the site manager who's always worked with us since 1996, was retiring. And we said, well, without his help, because there's a lot of backdoor stuff that people never see or even know about, particularly when you're dealing with state-owned property, as far as permits and exceptions and stuff like that. I mean, just the paperwork alone that Chris and I would go through is something that most people wouldn't want to do. And he never, that doesn't pay him any money. It's a commitment he made to his community to want us there and to make his community benefit from our participation there. And I'm very reluctant to make a long-term commitment once he does retire. But once he announced that he was going to stay through our event next year, I committed to saying, sure, we'll be back. And then we had a little confusion over the date itself. And fortunately for us, the Clarksville people were kind enough to allow us to have the 1st of June at their site and the end of June at Metropolis. And that's critical because that property is actually part of the waterfowl flyway. And it's underwater until probably early April. And it takes about 2 months for it to dry out. And if we had gone there at the end of May, we would probably be in a situation that because of that, they couldn't even get the targets under the ranges. So moving that date back to the end of June was very critical for us to be able to use the site. As I said, you guys stepped in, worked with your Clarksville contacts, got that worked out, and saved me the embarrassment of having put my foot in my mouth about where we were going next year. So first of all, let me thank you guys for making that happen. And let me apologize to the shooters for the confusion.
Yeah, we were put some work in. We found a great location there in Clarksville. We're going to actually be at Cross Creek Clays, which is a clay shooting gun club, but a beautiful facility. I see Augusta over your shoulder there. And I think the first time I saw it, I said, it is to clay shooting what Augusta is to golf. I mean, it's just an amazing facility. The guy's got it's landscaped. He has paved. I think he has 400 total shooting stations for clays.
Wow.
4 separate ranges on at least 3 of the ranges. And maybe by the time we get there on all 4 ranges, he has 70 golf carts that he has paved paths like to right up to the shooting station. I mean, the place is crazy. And he's got azaleas everywhere and a working white flyer airplane in the driveway when you pull in. It's a great lodge. So we're really excited about that location. I know a lot of shooters are excited that we're back at Metropolis. Being one of how long have we been at Metropolis, Mike?
96.
So it's one of the remaining kind of original sites.
The only original remaining site from when I took over ASA back in 96. And that relationship with Chris, the fact that he's still there working for the state and doing what he does has been amazing. But when you talked about the site being Augusta, when we used to go to Augusta and the site we had there at Wildwood Park, there was they had well, we called it a frisbee range, but it was actually, I guess, disc golf. It was the disc golf headquarters of the world. And we were negotiating using some of their property. And the guy says, well, you have to understand, you can't just come here and do anything. This is the Augusta National of disc golf. And so when we realized that they didn't have any azaleas, Don and I, as we left after the meeting, we went and put some pots of azaleas on their front doorstep and said, here, congratulations, guys.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that a little bit, because like I think Augusta is a good example. Paris, Texas is a good example of sites that worked. And I know I get asked, like, would we ever consider going back to Augusta or Paris? And I was there the last year we were in, well, Augusta and Paris.
Yeah.
And Augusta, I think they did some timbering, correct?
Yeah, it wasn't third row cut like they did Uchi on us this last year. They literally just demolished. There was 4 ranges on the backside that we were using, and they were gone. I mean, just gone. And that's why we had to step in and start using the last years we were there, a lot of the property that was the disc golf facility.
Yeah. And in Paris, Texas, another great location, laid out well for us, but just nowhere to grow.
No, we've put that when we were looking at sites back in the early 2000s. If we had a room for 11 ranges, that was more than we needed. We had the 10 event ranges, then we had the practice range, and then we were doing the known distance thing, which was another range. So if you could put in 12, 13 ranges, that was plenty of room for everything. Well, now we have to have room for 17 ranges to accommodate all the different disciplines and the number of attendants we have, because we're not dealing with 1,200 people. Now we're dealing with almost 2,000 people. And so we've been fortunate enough to be able to work with Delta McKenzie on arranging to have targets for all this, because that's a big ask. When you start taking a target company and saying, oh, by the way, we're going to need an extra, I don't know, 4 ranges of targets for every event this year. Would you mind making those for us?
Yeah.
Sure, not a problem. So we outgrew Paris, we outgrew Augusta. We've had several sites where we actually had the site sold out from underneath us, like at Myrtle Beach. So every year you're always looking at those things. And it's so when you get away from private lands and you get into public lands, there's less of a chance of that property suddenly becoming privatized or diverted to another purpose. And that's why we like to go to those facilities. But at the same time, for a facility to truly work for us, it's the local community support that we get from the sports commissions or the tourism people. That's what drives the bus for us. I mean, as people can well attest to, when we were in Cullman this year, if it hadn't been for the Cullman Parks and Rec Department and the great people at St. Bernard's, that event would have been a disaster. You suddenly, within a 24-hour period, you arrange for a way to move thousands of people from a high school 6 miles away onto the site and then get them back. And you can't do that overnight. If you even thought about trying to do that with just one of those entities without the other, it wouldn't have worked. And if we tried to do it on our own, it never would have worked. And you got to find bus drivers willing to work on a Saturday. And I'm talking about a 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift. That's a 13-hour shift. And say, sure, I think I'll do that. That sounds like fun. But I think people can realize that alone is why you need a really strong local support group, and that they're the ones that benefit from the economic impact we bring in, and they're willing to do these things for us. And our relationships with the local communities is far more important than people even begin to think about. I mean, the sites are great. The requirements for a site start with you have to have at least 300 acres of trees. And people don't realize, but that 300 acres, over 200 of those acres are strictly for safety reasons.
Right.
The ranges can fit into 100 acres, but you can't put them 100 yards apart. You got to have 200-yard safety buffers between the backs of the stakes and on. It's just the site alone has to have the facilities that we can do. You have to have the power. You have to have 50 amp power, 30 amp power. You have to have robust internet because of the CAM situation, and also because of our needs and our trailers and our sponsors.
It's
All those,
2023.
yeah,
Got to have internet in 2023.
I guess so. Anyway, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm old school. I still use a pencil and read the newspaper. But that when you start talking about getting a site put together and you look at the logistics, the need for having parking, the need for having facilities, uh, it's it's a Rubik's cube, and to solve that Rubik's cube really takes all the people that have to come to the table to agree to make it work. And we've had the pleasure working with a lot of great communities and a lot of great people. Probably one of the hardest things I have to go through is explaining to certain people why we can't come back. I mean, obviously,
Right.
sites, if the site has something happen to it, like in Augusta, that was, sorry, but can't help you. They actually came up to us with a couple of new sites, neither of which would have worked, unfortunately. But they understood that the site that they were offering us no longer worked for us. Um, and then there's sites that you can't go back to for no fault of their own, other than the fact that we've grown in our
Right.
requirements and our needs. Paris is a perfect example. And those are such great people. In fact, that's why we still support that AMAM that Texas does, the state Texas amateur in May, as a way of thanking the city of Paris for all the years of support they've given us.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things you touched on. Two things there, one being the local community, and then the second being site selection. I'll get to site selection because it is the area that I was most naive coming in and taking this job, how easy it was to find a site. But what I've really enjoyed the last 2 years is getting to know those communities, and I can't stress enough how much help those communities are to us. Like in Foley, the city crew comes out. They help. The ranges are clear when we get there. They help us unload the trucks and get targets out there, and that happens everywhere. And the friendships built there in the community. Coleman. What Thursday we had a storm during a team shoot, and a storm that was a storm. I hope we don't have too many more of those in my tenure with ASA. But that left us with some issues on Friday morning, and so as people who've been to Coleman know that all the parking there is in grass. It's fields, and we had 5 inches of rain in 3 hours, I think they said. And so that eliminated the parking. So we had a meeting at 10 o'clock on Friday morning with St. Bernard's, the city of Coleman present. And they said that there's no parking here, which is why we had to shut down the village for Friday. We only had concrete parking for about 300 cars. And so we got that filled in, met with the city, and you made the joke about the cities really drive the bus for this. They literally drove the bus in Coleman. They said, well, what we can do is we can park at the high school and we'll bus people over. And they had that was at 10 o'clock in the morning. They had that figured out by lunchtime. Leah was telling us not only did we need bus drivers to go to and from the high school to St. Bernard's, but we still needed people to be shuttled on site because they were dropping them off at the vendor area, and then we needed to get them back to the ranges. So she had 2 crews, we had parking crews, and it was amazing what they turned around in less than 24 hours. And so I think that's something as I talk to people and they give site locations, it's like, we start to look at the sites, and we also, more importantly, is we try to find the people. And, you and I were talking before we got on here, and people are like, oh, we've got a great club, and no disrespect to the clubs. We want to see them grow and work with them at ASA too, but we need more than the local archery club involved. We've got to have the movers and shakers in the community that can make those decisions and get us buses and public transportation lined up. And Minden's another great example. That site's just amazing. What Tommy and the crew there do for Sergeant Major, they have that place, and Sarah and the tourism department and going over. It's just there's so many people and so many moving parts involved that I just had no idea the scope of what was needed. And that's on the people side of things. Then you get to the site location, and I'm not saying this because I want people to stop giving us recommendations, because we do need those, and they've generated leads. You and I've talked about how you have found certain sites in the past, but those sites, don't take it personally if we don't end up there, because as I said, the thing I was most naive about when I started Hallie, my first ASA I think was 2018. And like I told you, Mike, I saw 3 ranges. I saw wherever Hallie did the team shoot, and then the 2 ranges she shot on. And I never stopped to consider the amount of property I was seeing, which is significant in 3 ranges. But then you've got to do that 17 times. And I, never stepped foot on a lot of those ranges. And like you said, 300 acres. I know when we looked at Clarksville, and Scott and I've talked about it, 300 acres of woods is like, that's the bare minimum. It has to be the perfect 300 acres to get those ranges in the way that we need to for what you address, the safety issues. And then they've got to be close enough proximity to the vendors, because we want the vendor village. We don't want people walking for miles. We'll shuttle them if we need to, but we want to support our sponsors in the vendor village. And that's part of what makes ASA great, is everybody kind of hanging out family reunion style. And so we don't want them isolated on some other property, half a mile away. And parking, I mean, and then you think like electric, 25 to 30 trailers come in, vendors come in, they need electric for their trailers, like you said, 30 or 50 amps. We need it for the shoot down, the registration trailer, internet now, because people are selling stuff. You want your sponsors to have internet. It's crazy. And
just to give you a number, in Coleman, that vendor village that we set up with all the different trailers and everything else that's going on, they have over 900 amps of electrical service. And we've actually had to ask the sponsors to turn off their air conditioning because we still didn't have enough power to power up everybody's air conditioners and run the event. So yeah, that power thing and that internet thing, because I don't ever want to go through that Coleman internet thing with you again. That was ugly.
It's 2023, Mike. We gotta have internet.
I promised you something that wasn't going to be available. My bad. I didn't know. I didn't understand how FEMA could put out
that was Minden, not Coleman.
I'm sorry, Minden. How they could put out a FEMA emergency services antenna that was like 50 feet in the air, and not realize that they didn't have the ability, because Minden itself, the city of Minden, didn't have bandwidth capacity to handle us. That right. They couldn't give us anything, and that was like, whoa, what a learning experience for this old man.
Yeah, that was and that was to no fault of Camp Minden.
No,
they had stuff out there. It was no fault to the city of Minden or Bossier City, but that was just, we overwhelmed the rural cell towers. But to the point that you made about having the right people involved, there were phone calls made to the lieutenant governor that year.
Yeah,
and that just having those connections and the people are amazing. But yeah, site location is, I'm sitting in Pennsylvania right now. You're in Georgia. One of the things I hear all the time, are you going to Pennsylvania? Well, for several reasons, no.
Been there, done that. I still got the T-shirt.
Well, where was it at?
Little Buffalo State Park near Hershey.
Okay. Yeah. Well, one of the problems with Pennsylvania, just because I want to be as transparent with people, is we're trying. We are looking at sites, but like in Pennsylvania, we're developing so fast that site in Hershey probably wouldn't work anymore, because they're developing the cities, the metropolitan areas are expanding so much that if we could find the property, it's so remote that we wouldn't have hotel locations. Right. And that's again coming back to the requirements for a site. I was just blown away that first time you sent me that 1.5-page checklist of things I needed to consider before we even stepped foot on a site. I was like, oh my, it was 1,000 hotel rooms. Actually, I think that the checklist says 4,000 beds.
We don't need 4,000 beds. I mean, some people can double, they can bunk together.
Right. But I think like just kind of the initial survey, that's what that's what we look at. And you want that within a 20-mile radius of the site. Well, that, a lot of your big rural areas that have property, you can't accommodate that. And then you've got dining and everything else. I mean, you have to feed all those people.
Like I say, when we went to Metropolis in 1996, 97, they didn't have Harrah's at that time. They didn't have they had the Baymont, but they didn't have that hotel infrastructure, but we're only bringing in 800 shooters.
Right.
And so the concern about 800 to 1,000 shooters, the concern of housing all those people wasn't as critical. Now you're bringing over 2,000 people plus family members and sponsors and all other attendees. If they're going to have to drive 45 minutes to get to the site, they're not going to do that very long. Right. I mean, Friday options made it a lot easier for people to make travel plans. and come in and deal with a little extra driving because they only have to do it for 1 or 2 days. But no, I can't ever begin to tell you how lucky we have been to have so many communities that have been able to step up and assist us in doing what we do.
Yeah, for sure. We've got great help. And that's one of the things as we look at sites, we're not just looking at what works now because it takes, you and I were talking, you said you spent about 4 years in Louisiana before you were able to land Camp Minden and being able to use that. And so if you take into consideration the time it takes to make things happen, and then you look down the road, I mean, we want to grow. We want we want to see bigger pro-ams, more people coming and experiencing ASA. We have to think futuristic because it takes so long to find a site. We can't find a site now that'll hold 2,000 people, but if we grow much beyond that, we're going to have to move again. And that's something Scott and I've talked a lot about, like how, practice ranges was a pain point this year, and we trying to come up with creative ways to not have the practice range take you so long to get through. Well, that takes property. And so as we continue to grow and looking at future sites, it's not enough that it would work right now. Do we have the option to add ranges and to expand so that we're not moving every year because it takes so much on the backside and the back end of that to make it happen?
When we first went to Metropolis, if anybody's ever shot there knows about the levee. Well, the levee only had two ranges on it, and then there was two ranges, and two ranges. So that entire back part now, where we now have 12 ranges, only had 8. We've been able to add all those ranges because of the fact that we could reconfigure things, recut things. Uh, Otherwise, we've been gone from there.
Right.
We just got very lucky that site did have that capacity, but we learned from that if we could find sites that gave us that ability, we'd be far better off.
Right.
Right now, the only site that we had this year that didn't give us 14 ranges was London.
Yeah.
And that's something that going forward, even though we're not there this year, to go forward, we have to figure out a way to solve that problem.
Yeah.
London's a great community on some hands. I mean, the hotels are there, access is good, parking overall is good, but to basically have it what we consider to be ASA Pro-Am quality, there has to be some expansion done, and this is going to give us a chance to maybe see if that opportunity can happen in London to go back and deal with those people. Great people, they do a great job for us, but again, it's a site issue now.
Yeah. It is a great community. I mean, it's one of the things you pull in. They've got the signs and welcome archers to London. The hotels all put out signs, and we enjoyed going there and the support to get the work done and the ranges ready. There is a local club that helps us there, and they do a great job. Chris McGinnis and the crew and Nick helping us get that work done. So it's not Chris McGinnis, Chris McDonald.
Yeah.
Chris McDonald there. And so yeah, it's something that is always evolving and changing. And we looked at, people were like, I've heard Ohio and Virginia and North Carolina. I heard Arkansas.
Really?
I heard a rumor that we were definitely going to Arkansas in 2023. I've not stepped foot in Arkansas.
I saw a site there probably 4 or 5 years ago. We looked at a site there, and again, it was one of those kind of things that 4 out of 5. If you get 4 out of 5, you're like, oh, that's good. No, if you don't have all 5, you're not going to have a long-term success. And I think that's the key to it, is that you can't go into something and say, well, that'll do. No, it can't. It has to be ready to accommodate 2,000 people from the get-go and do it without having to jump through a bunch of hoops. So that's where you end up passing on sites or saying, well, I realize you have a lot of the pieces, but you have to solve a Rubik's cube. And if you can't solve the cube, you can't do the deal.
Yeah.
You might, but I never could.
No. We've looked, and Scott and I talked about it. It's one of those things. Ken can sit in his office and do a lot of the pre-work for us with Google Earth. He gets on there and draws out the ranges and can mark everything up, and we'll send a picture like, yeah, this doesn't work. And or this works. The other thing that we have to take into consideration, because he and I were very excited about a potential place, and we actually called Don Bailey because of his tenure and long-standing relationship with ASA and doing a great job as tournament director.
Yeah,
Hey, look at this.
I'm the Godfather. He's the Don. I mean,
That's
he's
right.
the Don.
The Don. We'll get him a name tag. But Don looked at it and he said, "Yeah, it's great." We said, "Look at those trees. Those trees grow where it's swampy. So it hasn't rained here in a month. What happens when it rains?" And we kind of looked at it and asked some questions and like, "Oh yeah, that's not going to work either." And so it is, again, it's the area that I come in most naive. I thought, "Oh, this is easy." And it's it's not. It's a challenge. We are excited about 2024 though, and the schedule we have out there. I know a lot of people like Metropolis and are happy to go back there. And for the shoot down standpoint over at Fort Massac, it's a great location. So we're excited about that. We do apologize again for the schedule. The schedule changes last minute and putting out sites, and I think the Facebook line was it was a cosmic wedgie between the schedule, the weather, and all that was going on. And I really wanted to make sure that, the schedule typically is launched during that classic week. And we thought we had it all. And so we put it out there, and
Until I pulled my stunt and I threw you a wrench, but that's all right. You guys handle it really well.
we worked it out. And again, great locations. We were able to juggle that stuff. So we really wanted to talk about that, let you know that the schedule is out there, get your hotel rooms. And one of the things I mentioned, hotel rooms and sites. I know some places people have talked to us and concerned about hotel rooms. Make sure that you're looking at the ASA website with the schedule out now. I know a lot of people are booking rooms. We put on there, we list the hotels that the tourism department works with. And so, like in Coleman, we heard that there were a couple hotels that were trying to gouge people. If they're not on that list, we don't have a lot of leverage with them. But if they're on that list and working with the tourism department, they're going to work hard to not have inflated hotel rooms. So as you book for 2024, make sure you're using the information that we put out that we get from the tourism departments.
Yeah, and sometimes there was a scheduling issue in Coleman. They also host a country music festival there, and the weekend of our event and the weekend for that event initially were overlapping. And so the hotel rates in Coleman, when we first announced the dates for next year, were based on the country
Rock in the
western
South, right?
Rock in the South, and they don't have the same requirements in that one that we do. Ours is you can't gouge us, you can't do what you're doing. There are hotels, like you said, that are not part of the family of hotels. I mean, Coleman's a perfect example. There's two hotels there that are not part of the hotel family. And so they're free to do whatever they want, and they do what they wanted to do, but everybody else kind of stayed in line. There's going to be 2 to 3 new hotels in Coleman probably in the next year. And that's going to, again, put more pressure on downward rates as opposed to, limited inventory. So yeah, every community we go to has that situation, and there's people who appreciate us coming. There's people who look forward to taking advantage of us.
Right. And so we'll pass on as much information as we have that we get from the local communities. So just make sure you check that out. That information is on asaarchery.com as well as the ASA app. So take a look at that while you're making your room plans for 2024. And Mike, anything else you wanted to say about sites or schedule?
I'm like I said, I'm very happy that you guys were able to find that site in Clarksville and make it work and do the due diligence you have to go through to make it all happen and make sure you have the people lined up that you need. They seem to be very, very capable of supporting our event. And I'm looking forward to that one. That puts me one step closer to being just the announcing voice of the pro shoot down, because there's nobody you can find that can say, "We'll start your 1 minute now." And as soon as
Not with the style that you do, Mike.
yeah, my elan, my panache. But yeah, I think that I'm looking forward to 2024. I think it's going to be good. I'm not going to be gone, but I'm going to continue to kind of move myself away from the day-to-day operations. And anytime a senior doesn't like where his range is located, go talk to Scott. Don't come talk to me. If you have a long walk to your range, remember, I'm in my 70s. And if you come to me and tell me that you're unhappy and I can walk 18 holes of golf in 90-degree weather and in Georgia up and down hills, and that's 7 miles. I don't have any sympathy for any of you guys. I'm sorry. But at the same time, I'm always willing to listen and keep a smile on my face and then just say, go talk to Scott.
Go
It's
harass Scott.
yeah, go talk to Scott. He's not even 60 yet. So he has to have some respect.
Well, and we'll have information that comes out later. Scott and I actually in a video talked about that, and just it's not always who's shooting where; it's what ranges can we get where. And some of those 50-yard ranges, like London, is a perfect example. Then we had 2 ranges right off the ball field there that sometimes we can get longer distances, but this year we couldn't max those out, where in the backside of that we could get our 50-yard ranges. So sometimes it is just limited to what ranges we can put where.
Yeah.
If we've got a spot that we can only get 30 or 40 yards and we go a little further down the road and can get 50, that's what we have to do. So, and Scott will go in more in depth than that, but I'm with Mike. If you have a complaint about that, Scott Parrott at asaarchery.com.
Don't
Let
forget,
him know.
and remember the motto is women and children first. The second motto is at ASA is if you see a senior, pick him up and give him a ride. But that's another story for another day.
Yeah. Well, Mike, thanks for sitting down and talking schedule and site location with me today. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Maybe get some golf in.
That's tomorrow.
All right.
I look forward to next year and seeing everybody, and I thank you for the opportunity to once again apologize for my intrusion into your schedule.
Yeah, there was a lot going on that weekend, and we survived. And
If you ever see me at 5:30 in the morning directing cars to park, you know something's wrong because I'm the last guy you want in the parking lot. Now there I was, and guys were driving in like, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm trying to help best
Yeah.
I can. Now would you please park between the lines?"